Good evening. Today we are continuing our journey through Speed Garage. We're going to be doing a tune in the style of DJ HEARTSTRING. Before we start, only 75% of people who watch my videos are subscribed. So do me a favour, will you, son? One little click will help me a lot. Thank you very much. Let's get into it. Alright, let's have a little listen from the top. Alright, lovely. Let's run through it. So we are at 141 beats per minute. We are in F minor. So starting out with these intro chords. So I've used this Juno plugin again for all of these speed garagey sort of 90s sounds. Something like a Juno or analog keys, stuff like that, really work very well. They produce that analog feel sort of effortlessly. So for our chord progression in the intro and the build, we're starting on the D flat major, which is the 6th. Then we go to the B flat minor, which is the 4th. Then to the F minor, which is the 1, and then A flat major, which is the 3rd. So they're pretty standard triads. We've just got the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th, but I've just taken the root note up an octave. And when inverting chords like this, it's up to trial and error. Like I'll try it like this initially, and then I'll just try different iterations of notes in different octaves. So to me, this one sounded best, and we did a very similar inversion on this second chord. So because this is the B flat, they've got two notes that are exactly the same. So these two notes and these two notes are exactly the same. The only one that changes is this middle one. So you sort of keep the stack in the same octaves, and it sounds quite nice. This one, just a very standard triad, root 3rd, 5th. And then this one, we went a little bit crazy. So this is the triad, and I've taken this one up. So it's a little bit more stretched, but on the last chord, it just really added something different. And then underneath that, we've got a pad. When we've got a pad underneath main chords like this, I tend to make sure that the notes and the inversions aren't the same. So we're not copying this and just making a pad out of that. They're still the same chords, but different inversions, different octaves. And then here and there, I've added some little sevenths and little extra notes just to make it a little bit more interesting. And with both of these, I've got a little bit of EQ, some OTT, some reverb and delay. And in the intro, we bring this bell straight in, which is going to occur throughout the song. In terms of writing the melody, I sort of just played on the keyboard what sounded best. Like, retrospectively, you can say this note, which is our constant, which is the E flat, which is our 7th, it gives it a little bit of a dark, sort of emotional feel. And we have this constant part of the melody at the top, and then at the bottom we have a change. So you could actually do it the other way around. You could have a lower note that is more constant, and then the top bit changes. But in terms of structuring a melody, if you're struggling, a nice way to frame writing a melody is having one constant and one change. That can be a little bit less daunting when you're writing a melody. But fundamentally, it's got to sound good against the chords and the vocal. Like, this would have taken me a while to really hone in. I would have tried loads of different variations of this and eventually landed on these notes here because they land nicely on the chords behind them. We've got this bell occurring throughout the song, but every time it goes to a different section, I change the sound of the bell. They're all still pretty similar, but it just helps it to have a bit of an evolution in the sound, so it's not literally the same thing again and again. And with these bells, what I've done on all of them is I've added this redux, which makes a lot of difference. So if we have a listen to that without the redux, and with, it just adds that crispiness, makes it sound a little bit more dirty. And as you can see on this EQ here, before we have a redux, all of our frequencies exist sort of around here. Then we add this redux in, we get all of this high-end information up here. So it just brings it out in the mix a bit more, gives it a bit more clarity, and just helps it to not sound so soft, because we want this to sound a little bit harder because of this kind of genre. So something like redux, distortion, can just help crunch those sounds when they're sounding a little bit too soft. I've slightly changed the melody from the intro. So in the intro, we go from this E flat, the A flat, to the E flat, to the C. Here we do the exact same thing with these first three notes, and instead of going up to the C, we go down to the G. So it feels a little bit more sort of melancholic. And as we're building here and there's lots of snares and more elements coming in, I felt like we didn't really need to carry on that bell. So we've dropped them, and then we've brought other elements in this section, like the drums. One thing I really liked was this vocal chop from the original. There's this sort of melody that happens because of the echo that's a bit like and I wanted to accentuate that a little bit more. So I used these pizzicato strings, holding on the root note, the F, and then going up to the second, which is the G. So it just helps to bring it a little bit of tension, a little bit more epicness, makes it feel a bit more orchestral in that build. And we also just start off in this build by bringing in a Reese. Just two saw waves, one fine-tuned up a little bit, one fine-tuned down, a little bit of a filter, some distortion, some more filtering, and that's pretty much it. And then we bring our drums in. So we just start in to build with that groove. And then we have our typical couple of snare risers, some crashes to go into the drop. And then as usual, I'm taking pretty much everything out of that little bit of pre-drop. So we almost have no instruments. We just have the vocal and those crashes before we hit that drop. So usual drums, kick. I've added loads of weird little percussion bits. So we've got this clap, this really swung hat. We've got a shaker. And then all these little bits of perks. And that in conjunction with the bass are the things that really keep the energy really high in this drop. So if we listen to the drums and the bass together. So one thing to note, we're actually changing the chord progression as we go into the drop. So we're starting on the F, the 1, we go down to the D flat, which is the 6, up to the E flat, which is the 7, and then down an octave, but holding on that E flat. And then we've got this little bass flick at the end. And it's a very simple patch. It's just a square wave and a saw wave with some PD to B, a filter on it, and a bit of compression, and that is literally it. Normally for this kind of sound, I would tend to start on a couple of saw waves. But I just felt like the square just had a little bit more body to it. And one thing that's super important is the placement of these notes. So I've got this notator 16D swing. I've made sure that the length of the notes sort of changes for every note, so they're not all exactly the same. So it gives it like a real nice groove. Also, I've pushed some of the notes back so they're not on grid. So that would be on grid there. We just push that back a little bit. Same with these ones. Mainly at the end of the phrase, I tend to push them back just a little bit. It helps to feel much more sort of rushed and a bit more skippy. So this is one that is quantized. So this is without the swing and when all of the notes are on grid. And then when they're off grid. It's such a subtle difference, but these little bits at the end especially give it so much more energy because it almost feels like if it was a bass player, they're almost a little bit late to play that note. But it makes the whole song almost sound a little bit faster. And that is something that I used to overlook so much, is the swing on basses especially. And if you spend time to really just find little pockets where it does skip a little bit more, it will just make the whole song sound more groovy. So it's definitely something I'd recommend spending time on. And once I've got that bass and those drums in, quite often I will put a load of kicks in the kick rack and then change the kick. Because quite often if I'm producing and it sounds a little bit flat, changing the kick will just breathe new life into it. So if you've got all of the elements there musically and they're all working in tandem and something's still not quite hitting right, change the kick. Just go through loads of different kicks and see which one works, because you will land on one that just really elevates the tune. And then we come back to the same melody pretty much that we had in the drop. Because the notes of our bass are slightly different, there are some notes that didn't work in the same way that they did with the chords in the intro. So I didn't totally copy and paste that. There are a few little changes, literally just to help them fit in with the new bass progression that we've got in the drop. And we've done the same here. We've got this redux on, makes a massive difference. And I put an OTT afterwards as well, which really helps bring that redux out a lot. So those two in tandem really help give it that sort of crunchy vibe, because without that, it can sound a little bit soft. And then our bell melody is slightly different in the second half from the first half, just to keep the musicality evolving a little bit so it's not exactly the same twice round. Just at the end of this phrase here, as we go into the second section of the drop, I'm just automating the filter cutoff here, so it just opens a little bit, and also the resonance, so it makes it sound like a little bit more acidy with that resonance. So it just changes the timbre of the bass a little bit, so it evolves as a sound and also sort of informs that this next section is coming. And there we have it. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any suggestions or requests for the kind of styles or tunes that you want me to emulate, hit me up in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope it's helped, and love to your mother.